That's good. I can't tell you how glad I am that all of you are here today. There's power outages, I know, there's trees down, and we know from last year here at the museum that we were damaged by a storm. Yesterday, I was talking to Mark Browning. Mark is out of town this week. And I said, you know, this is 1 year since the museum was hit by the storm. And I said, there are storm warnings out for today. And he said, lightning doesn't strike twice. He was wrong. We were hit last night by the storm. And during the night, we made repairs. The hangar door, there was a gap in the hangar door. They'd separated. The wind had blown so hard that it bowed the doors in. And that's how they became separated. Water was any number of places inside the museum. The trailers parked out back were spun around in disarray. But now you would never know it. Great group of volunteers. They did a great job. Some announcements. We'd like to let you know there's a membership table near the entry door where you come into the hangar. Please, if you're inclined, please become a member. Also, program change. Our program in 2 weeks will be about the sanctuary on the hill. And this is a program about Mission First. Mission First provides a place for veterans. So speaking that day will be Paul Lindbergh. He's one of the top guys over at that program, and he'll tell you about it. And then also we'd like to remind you that to have a reservation for the next lunch and share, you need to call. The saying you'll be here when you walk in, you'll be here next week is not a reservation. Please call the museum to make a reservation. We have a special announcement from Donna Bone.
Thank you, John. Everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. Nice to see everybody this morning. I wanted to tell you about a project that Mark Browning and I are working on that will be a tour of the World War II sites in Evansville. So I've already got them all marked and written down. I've got a route plan. We're just trying to figure out the bus part of the program. So we hope it'll be maybe an hour and a half, maybe a 2-hour trip. We had hoped to start it in May. I don't know yet if we'll have the bus part of it fixed, but what I would like to gauge today, and we're going to pass around on the table a sign-up sheet to let us know if you're interested. So as you get the sheet, please print. We'll need your name, your phone, and your email. Also, just want to let you all know I'm on the schedule for October. I'll be coming back to talk to you about the impact of the 1937 flood on Evansville. So I hope I see you all in October. Thank you. Back to John.
Jack Butcher will give us some prayer.
Would you stand with me, please? Father, there is much to be thankful for on this early spring day in Evansville, Indiana, at the Evansville Wartime Museum. Thank you, Father, for this day and for allowing us to be a part of it. We are privileged today to once again host a program recognizing courageous action, supporting freedom around the world. And today we learn of activities in Norway. There is much to be thankful for as we begin a season of growth and awakening. Help us, Father, to appreciate the beauty of what you provide us. And now we ask your blessing on what we do here. And as we acknowledge with thanks all those who made these meetings possible, we continue our program with a pledge of allegiance to our flag and our country. Amen. Do our pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Larry Head, your turn to speak.
Thank you, Jack. Please feel free to join in. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the hope of the brave? Our speaker today is Nils Johansen. Nils graduated from Purdue University. He earned a bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering and also a PhD. He was a professor of geology at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks from 1971 to 1995. And then moving to southern Indiana, became advisor emeritus from 1995 to 2015. Nils is a retired reserve artillery officer in the Norwegian Army. He is married, has two daughters. Two daughters have provided him the good fortune of 5 girl grandchildren. So the program that Nils offers today is a story about his dad, Ivar, and his exploits in Norway during World War II.
I guess I'm on. So, people in the back, yes. Yeah, I see waving hands. That's great. Anyway, the talk that I'm going to give today is about essentially to honor my dad, and comes in 2 parts. A little bit about what happened to Dad at the beginning of World War II, and then I come in then with memories from the resistance movement from about 1943 on. So some of my memories will be there. So first a little bit of Dad's, and then a little bit about family lore, finishing up World War II.
Okay. I hate to interrupt Nils, but there is a Toyota on the north side, the side towards Petersburg Road. The engine is running, and there's no one in it.
White Toyota.
So if you, does anybody have a white Toyota? Let's
It's right
see
here. I
hands.
can
White
see it
Toyota.
right here. It's
Somebody
running. The
wants a
car's
white
running.
Toyota.
I'm too embarrassed. I'll let it run first.
Okay.
Oh my God! Don't do that. Come on. Give me the keys.
Okay, a little bit about my dad.
Thank you very much, by the way. No, you know that? I remember leaving my car running out. I hope you had a sharp seat. Maybe I'm ready.
A little bit about that. He was born in 1913 and died in 2007. And he finished high school in 1933 and started on law studies. And he finished law studies about 1938-39 and finished off that with a study probably half a year in England in 1939. And then he and Mom went on a nice Europe trip in 1939, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. And then, let's see, that Europe trip was really something. Because Mom and Dad, Mom said, just in case, my dad suffered from Alzheimer's the last few years, and I lived here in the United States, so I didn't quite catch as much as I wanted from Dad's then fragile memory. But Mom said that when they traveled in Europe, England, Paris, Berlin, in 1939, they were sharing a train ride with German soldiers that were on their way to the Polish border, 1939. So when Mom and Dad came back to Norway, they said, we're probably going to have a war real soon. And of course people said, nah, that won't happen. Well, on September 1, it happened. So that's how that started. Now during his law studies, he also had military boot camp, a whole grand total of 87 days in the summertime. And I'll show you some pictures of that. And after that, he continued his law studies. And let's take a look at some of the pictures that I have here. A little bit about the country, a little geography lesson if you wish. So here's Norway, Sweden, Denmark, United Kingdom, Germany. So that's the lay of the land. And Germany, of course, in World War II, took care of Poland, took care of the Czech Republic, took care of Austria, and was essentially sitting here. And then in early April 1940, they expanded to Denmark and Norway. And that's when things really started to happen to my dad. Because my dad was actually on active duty on the day Germany attacked. What kind of active duty? Well, reservist, since Dad by then finished all the 87 days, he would become a reservist. And his artillery unit put some people up for what they call neutrality guard. Basically, wear uniform and be sort of a military presence, just in case some spies would come around or something like that. Anyway, 9th April, things changed. Here is my dad's boot camp, and here he is, number 27. There he is. So, pretty simple boot camp. Norway in these years was really downplaying any kind of military, so any kind of thing to the military was just poo-pooed. And then finally, realizing, the government started to realize that, hey, things are going on in Europe, maybe we should do something about it. So it started to pick up a little bit, but not that much. So, on 9 April 1940, things happened. And that's why I asked to have this day for my talk, because 85 years ago, on the 9th of April, Norway was attacked by Germany. And you can see here that, yes, they took Denmark and Norway, and then a little bit later, a month later, Netherlands and Belgium, and also started moving into France. So this was an early occupation, if you wish, in April 1940, and then really started rolling after that time. Now, the German forces attacking Norway, the Red Arrows, they came, Denmark was pretty much run over right away, but they took and essentially attacked all the major ports all over Norway. The fortunate thing was that Oslo, the capital, that task force got slowed down because the cruiser, main ship for that particular task force, was essentially sunk by an old fort just south of Oslo. Sunk by torpedoes from the late 1800s, cannons from the late 1800s. It was just remarkable that it worked. Now that did something to Norway, Oslo, that the German occupying forces were delayed. They landed on the airfield in Oslo, and that's where Dad come in. He said shooting at airplanes and stuff like that. He didn't ever say he hit anything, but that was what they were doing, just shooting at airplanes. And the German paratroopers and others landing at the airfield, and then from there walked into Oslo to show strength. But basically it was a small infantry unit that came in and basically scaring the population. Yeah, that was about it. Now, 9 April 1940. So these German soldiers had probably flown into the local Oslo airport and then walked about 10-15 miles from the airfield down the main street in Oslo just to show presence. So Oslo was really not quite occupied. German presence, yes, but this thought to be an important thing, because after morning of 1940, April, Dad and others were gathered up, and what are we going to do next? So there was a small little military establishment just close to where we lived, and Dad was there with some friends, having shot down airplanes and probably missing, but a lieutenant, his name was Einar Gundersen, anyway, pretty famous in Norwegian artillery since then, ended up a 3-star general and stuff like that. He had been, with the artillery school, in charge of moving the things out of the school so the Germans wouldn't get it. Somebody else took care of transporting the stuff away, but he was essentially the local cleaning out things and giving it to people. And he came to my dad and his friends, and said, "Hey, boys, let's just do a little bit of skiing." So here is what happened. This is Oslo, and they were about there, and the Gardermoen field was, finding it. There it is. So they moved on skis from here to there. And that's about the 50-mile run. But they were well-trained people and grew up with skis, so that was just, yeah, fine, we can do that. Put on a backpack and ski and get over to the Gardermoen area where the artillery units had set up. So essentially they got out of town before the next few days. Then of course more Germans came in and it got to be tighter and stuff like that. So Prior to that, it was pretty much an open town. And then, when Dad started out of here, then his units would be following out of here, going up this valley here, and another valley down here. So this was, the name of the valley is Gudbrandsdalen, and this is where Dad would be fighting, essentially retreating all the way up here. Now this is also where the Brits came in a little bit later. Let's see. The Brits landed about 17 April. So it was fairly soon after 9 April to the 10 days later almost, the Brits were landing here and came down here and started meeting the German forces and Norwegian forces right here. The problem with that was that the British forces were territorials, basically reservists. They had no decent equipment. They had no winter clothing. So they were really struggling in Norwegian winters that they weren't used to from England to do that. But anyway, the Norwegian forces and the British forces came and started then retreat, fighting the Germans as they come along here. Dad said a couple of stories he had about that. He said one of the cooks was playing with a hand grenade, and the cook shouldn't have done that. They lost a hand. But these things, remember, these soldiers, Norwegian soldiers, are basically kids and very limited military training. Very limited military training. But anyway, they fought up and down to this area here, where the Brits originally had gotten off the boats. Now they were going to put them back on the boats, and this happened about 26 April to 2nd May, that time period, the Brits evacuated. And then in 6 May, the Norwegian forces in South Norway surrendered. In North Norway, different story. But did I lose? No. In North Norway, they kept on fighting for a while. And in case you are a history buff, in North Norway was the first time the German land army Wehrmacht were actually defeated in battle at the Battle of Narvik. So there's a couple of little interesting tidbits about that particular campaign, but all I know about that is what I've read. Anyway, so they came and were surrendering here. What happened to the soldiers were basically not interned, not made prisoners of war or anything like that, because after all, Norwegians were a Germanic race and all that good stuff, so they didn't do anything serious yet about that. So the soldiers were given essentially a piece of paper saying, congratulations, you can go home. Now there's a railroad up and down here and down here, so railroad traffic here is fairly straightforward, so move back was fairly straightforward. So, and that little piece of paper, the museum here has my dad's copy of that, saying this, signed by an Hauptmann something or another, that Private Johansen can authorize to go home. Now, the sergeant and officers, same deal. They are about the only real career senior officers were interned. Everybody else was basically given a piece of paper and go home, which was nice because that gave us Norwegian a pretty good start on any kind of resistance movement, because you could then keep your rifles and not turn it in and stuff like that. So the surrendering in South Norway essentially started to ferment into this resistance movement. And also people realized that, hey, we can fight the Germans and we can do it. So the resistance movement really took off that early, and kept on growing. There's some nice books about that. You may have heard a book report from number 24. I was one of the senior resistance movement in that group, and he is the only Norwegian that has got the equivalent of 3 Medal of Honors. A couple of others got 2, but he was 3, and I had the pleasure of meeting him at the Norwegian War Museum. One time I was over in Norway I was doing some work with the artillery unit over there. But anyway, so things were falling apart, and now my second half of the story comes in, where I started to remember things from growing up. So that was the resistance movement part. So some of the things I remember would be maybe of some interest. First of all, in 1944, when this particular subunit was busted open, Gestapo and the Nazis took my dad's 2 brothers, and they thought they gotten the Johansen brothers. No, they didn't realize there were 3 Johansen brothers, not 2. So when my 2 uncles ended up in prison, Gestapo and all that stuff, Dad was then essentially on the run from summer of 44 till we had to leave Norway in spring of 45. The movement or some in the family was my uncle Johan ran the family bakery business, and this was a steel frame bakery building. And steel frame bakery building are somewhat more solid than the brick facing buildings around, so that got to be by default our fallout shelter. And also it's a bakery, so all sorts of things come in and go out. So my uncles then, all sorts of fascinating things went through the bakery. Not flour, but Sten guns, machine guns, probably explosives and stuff like that went through the bakery as a loading or rearming operation. So that was pretty cool. And also, like I said, it was a fallout shelter. And this is where some of my memories starting to kick in. Yes, I was quite young at the time. I'm right now, I'll be 84 this Christmas, in case you wondered. So yes, I'm old enough to be here. But anyway, so I remember then air raid sirens. Oslo was never really attacked in any serious way, the way you see Germany and cities and stuff like that. There was the occasional air raid and the occasional bomb being dropped, but nothing like you see in Germany and stuff like that. So it was pretty low-key aerial warfare. But anyway, the air raid sirens went off, and I remember the first time I really remember it was I was in my wagon, not the pram, but sort of a sporting type thing, and the sirens went off, and Mom was visiting a friend about 6/10 of a mile from home, and I remember Mom really running hard, and I remember that sitting in the wagon and watching the light poles pass and pass, and it was fascinating to just see the light pole passing the wagon. So that was one thing. Now, since we lived in the building facing the street, here they are. This building and this building is part of the family facing the street, and the bakery will be in the back of these buildings. So, and these were brick and timber type buildings. So we were here, the alarm, air raid sirens would go off, and we would take the back stairway down and into the basement of the bakery building. Well, we lived in this floor fourth floor of the building. The buildings have been essentially built by my grandfather, my dad's grandfather. My dad died fairly early when Dad was about 14, but the old Johansen was running the bakery business up until essentially his grandson took it over. But here, this is the lay of the land. So my grandmother had the other half of the apartment up here, balcony, and my grandmother had a heart condition, so she wasn't really interested in going down 4 flights of stairs, no elevators, and then another flight of stairs to get into the basement of the bakery building, and then back up again later. So what my grandmother said was, she put on her coat and sat on the parson's desk and said, "You'll see me when we get back." And yes, that was my grandmother. Anyway, we came down the stairs, and we couldn't really go across the courtyard into the bakery business because, to me, something weird was going on. Things were falling out of the sky and made clattering noises on the surface. The best I can figure it out, it was airplanes have been shooting at something and then blowing up, and the shrapnel, essentially gravity-fed, fell down. So there wasn't any, serious thing, but it's like a hailstorm. You don't want to be out in it if you can avoid it. So we waited till whatever it was fell down and then went down into the bakery basement. And that part of the bakery was called the ice cream cellar. Why? Because they made ice cream there. And as kids, that was really cool because occasionally the ice cream machine was still almost running, and some of my cousins and I could actually steal a handful of pretty good ice cream and enjoy it while air raid sirens and stuff like that went on. But another thing that happened in Oslo in those years was, of course, if a German or Nazi came on the streetcars and stuff like that, then of course people would leave. So get out. And so the streetcar company had to put down notice that you are not allowed to leave the streetcar because if there are seats available and stuff like that. Anyway, so my mom said the story that we were on the streetcar and a German soldier came on, and I put on the fakest grin you can ever think of a kid doing, and I told the mom, I'm smiling. I didn't have my S's and all the letters down yet. And that poor German soldier, he probably was just a nice guy and smiled, and that was all there was to it. But Mom said she was pretty scared, as in, that we were run into, quote, the good guy in terms of the soldier. Wasn't any Nazi or anything like that. But after that summer, that was summer of '44, and I don't remember seeing my dad very much since that time. We were hiding, and at that summer of '44, we were at some family relation at the farm. And I remember Mom, my baby daughter had just been born that spring and needed to be washed, and Mom had an infected finger, don't get it wet. And I remember Mom with a blister thing on her finger and trying to get her hand not wet and giving my sister a bath. Some of you moms will recognize that one very early. Another thing we did was, there was a little girl on that farm. I remember her name, Synnøve. But anyway, she and I were about the same age. And that little farm also had a lot of pigs. Baby pigs. And Synnøve and I decided to let the pigs loose. So the rest of the day we were all catching piglets. Needless to say, I don't I didn't get the spanking from it, but I was not a very popular kid with my friends. Another thing, Sinna, when I discovered was if you have an old wagon with axle grease in it, war paint. So Sinna, when I put on a good war paint, and Sinna was a very, very Norwegian blonde, and axle grease and blonde hair, her mom was probably not happy about that. But that was a little thing I remember, and also that time period, I think I remember hearing the grown-ups talking about an invasion. So beyond that, like I said, I think I heard the word invasion, but at my age, so what? I didn't know anything about it, what it was, or anything like that. So, also, a little bit later, on the windows in our apartment buildings here, and Mom's dad is a carpenter, so he had put up some, like a rib wall from a gym at the window, so I could stand in the window holding on to these and not falling out. So that was a pretty cool way. I could stand in the window and look at traffic below me and stuff like that. Well, one incident was, there was some commotion going on around here. This is the old subway station. And I heard some shots firing. And then from the window up here, I saw a guy lying quietly in the street. Probably an assassination by Gestapo or Nazis or anything like that. And just as I saw this, Mom took me away. So I can verify that story. But Mom said some other stories about that time period because Dad was in hiding and we lived in the apartment. And like I said, my grandmother, my dad's mom, lived across the hall from us. And the Nazis came to Mom and said, you know, we, guns and all, we want to find out where your husband is. We need to know right now. And essentially took Mom and to the window and said that, you know, if you don't tell, we're going to drop you out the window. And they didn't do it, but Mom said she was shaking for a long time afterwards. And realized, also she said, that they were serious about trying to find the third Johansen brother. My other two brothers, like I said, ended up at Akershus, the fortress. That was where they also assassinated the resistance people. So the assassination place was right outside their windows in the jail. And my uncle said, it wasn't too bad. We were beaten up a little bit. But that's a standard Norwegian understatement and stuff like that. I don't know what happened to my uncles, but they came through with not permanent damage that I'm aware of or anything like that. So, then I also remember my third birthday party, because we were kids, neighbors, and my cousins and stuff like that. We were running around the table and shouting my name and stuff like that. And there's a nice family picture of all of us cousins and my sister and I in the couch, and my sister with her big blue eyes looking into the camera. But I remember playing with my cousins and running around and yelling and stuff like that. It was really a nice birthday party. Now, a little bit later, it got more serious. So we had to move out of the apartment and started living with friends at various and sundry places. One of the things I really remember from that time period was that we lived at the house near where that my dad had been in that little small military establishment. But anyway, the Germans had an anti-aircraft cannon right next to the house where we lived. And that was really cool because it was snow. It's April, March, April. And it was really cool to be out making snowmans and stuff like that. and also right across the pond was that German anti-aircraft installation. I didn't quite understand what it was or anything like that, but I remember very much seeing that anti-aircraft gun being ready to do it. Now from there, Mom and Dad and my sister would get to Sweden. And that was things because Dad being in the resistance, that was arrangements made and stuff like that. But a little bit, backtrack for a second here. So here's Oslo, Sweden being neutral, and there's a small town at this, near the border with Sweden. So we had then a train ride, starting with the tram, and then the train ride down to this little town, and then I'll talk more about that. But anyway, the train ride started by this house where the German installation had been. So Mom said, as we were waiting for the streetcar to come and take us to the train station, one guy came running down, followed by a couple of Norwegian Nazis shooting after him. And say, stop, stop, stop. But of course, the guy didn't stop or anything like that. And wasn't hit either, lousy shooting. But fortunately. And then, so Mom said, ew. Have we already been discovered? No, they were just after that other guy. So from what I was told, that was straightforward, getting to the station. Now, when you're about 3 years old, you're really proud of knowing your name. Well, Johansen is a pretty common name in Norway. It's just sort of like Johnson or stuff like that, but it's fairly common. But I had learned to say my name as one complete line. And it come out, Nils Ivar Johansen Brødbil. So Nils Ivar Johansen Brødbil, bread truck. Because my uncle had a bakery and Mom would always say there's one of Johansen's bread trucks. So I thought naturally that would be part of my name. Now, remember, Johansen Bread Factory. Yeah, so all of a sudden it wasn't just a Johansen name, it was the bread factory Johansen name that my great-grandfather had started. And yeah, so Mom and Dad were really serious about not say anything, my names or anything. It was really hurtful because I loved to say my name because I was so proud of having learned how to do it. Anyway. So I was told I was given some sedative, so I wouldn't do anything dumb on the trip down. And I don't remember anything from that trip, so the sedative apparently worked. But I woke up again after we left that small town into a boat to drive over to Sweden. And I remember everything was so quiet. Everything was so quiet. Everybody was lying down except the lady next to me had her hand over the railing. But other than that, everything was down at the bottom of the boat. And in the distance, we hear the German patrol boat looking for us, but they missed us. And later I was told that that lady with the hand was a courier, and what she had in her hand was then the weighted down documents. So in case the Germans would come to the boat, she could, and the document would disappear. Well, sometimes some things you learn a little bit later. But that was an interesting trip. And then we came to Sweden, and all of a sudden, lights everywhere. Because in Norway, you had cover lights and everything else. Everything was dark, and you couldn't have lights, so you needed a flashlight or something in the, yeah. In Sweden, everything was lit up. And we walked across the shore, And I remember a Swedish policeman really grabbed his hand and came up to our accommodations. And again, I don't remember Dad being there. He was probably then moved to the Norwegian police forces in Sweden, and that's in the display case you have in the back here for my dad's work. That's the one with the Norwegian flag on it. That was the police force, so essentially a Norwegian army unit in disguise. That's why they call it the police rather than our army unit. So anyway, so Dad, I never saw him in my trip to Sweden. And I think on one occasion, Mom took us kids to Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, and apparently for meeting Dad. That was the guess. What I really remember from that trip was the trip to the zoo and to watch the polar bears. That was really cool. And 20 years later, 25 years later, wife and I went to Copenhagen on totally different business. I was so proud of myself. Hey, the zoo looks like exactly what it was 25 years ago. Yeah, it wasn't, but my memory was really happy about these kinds of things. And I met Swedish boys and started some games and stuff like that. I didn't know what they were in Swedish, so Mom had to do some translation and some helping to do that. But we had a game and played it in school quite a bit. So in those years, you could have a knife with you to school. No, not a big deal. Everybody sort of had a knife with it. So what you did was to say, there's a nice piece of soft soil, and you divide with the line in two. That's your half and that's the other half. And put your knife down and parcel it out. And it was a trick then to have your two with it. That was a pretty cool thing to do during recesses and stuff like that. We had in my grade school some soft soil areas, so yeah, school have changed quite a bit, haven't they? But anyway, then back to that. So we spent then time with some family, friends of Mom's in Sweden. And sideline, Mom's worked for a porcelain sales people called Folman, and the Folman family was essentially one of the first Jewish family admitted to Norway after the rescission of the Jewish paragraph in the Norwegian Constitution. The Norwegian Constitution from 1814 said that Jews and Jesuits are not to be allowed into the country. Well, the Jew paragraph was rescinded after a few decades, and the Jesuit paragraph till the 1950s, I think, when Jesuits were not allowed in Norway. Go figure, but anyway. So, then back to Norway. 8th of May, the war was over, and shortly thereafter we were traveling back to Oslo. And this was pretty cool because I remember having a little cap, and it was really cool to watch out the window and see the whole train and the move and stuff like that. And I lost my cap. But I must have had another one because some pictures of the family at the train station in Oslo, I had the cap again. So anyway, go figure. But one of the other things that happened on that was my family said that I had forgotten my Norwegian. I spoke pretty good Swedish. So yeah, it took me, 2 months to, quote, forget my Norwegian and starting pretty decent Swedish. That didn't last long. My Norwegian came back real fast. But anyway, so that was when I finally saw Dad again. And we went for some walks and stuff like that. And I remember in that time, in June 1945, I remember seeing all sorts of trucks with German soldiers being shipped out and stuff like that. I remember seeing all sorts of big trucks. I remember when you're little, trucks are really big. So that sort of thing. So I remember seeing that end of cleaning up after the Germans have left. Now our apartment was taking over after we left for Sweden, taking over by Gestapo or Nazis actually. And fortunately, the Germans are good record keepers. So by the time we were on our way back through Dad's resistance unit and stuff like that, they went around and collected all sorts of things from our apartment that the Germans had taken and put in their apartments and got them back to Norway, back to our apartment. So essentially when we came back to Norway, we had pretty much everything back the way it was when we had to leave for Sweden, except a couple of books. And that didn't make any sense when you're a preschooler and stuff like that. But later, when I started learning to read in grade school and stuff like that, I realized that, hey, there are some missing books in some of these things. You know, volume 6 was missing or something like that. And the story came out that, yes, those were some of the few things that the Nazis had still kept and we couldn't quite get it back. So when Dane and I moved some of my parents' stuff to our house back 20 years ago. And anyway, I have some of that set of books still with the missing number, so it's a nice reminder. So that was a really story about what happened. Let's take a look at and here's the other apartment building the family had. So these two buildings, they kept the facades, but here the basement in the back turned into all sorts of stores and stuff like that. So here's part of the bakery, and then all those buildings are filled up with apartments and stuff like that. So when the family sold this whole block off, it was pretty traumatic to some extent to sell the family business type that, but it had to be done. And we came out actually pretty good. The family came out pretty well on this whole real estate deal. Now here is graffiti from this time period. So be faithful towards age 7. Age 7 is Håkon the 7th, and that's the initial. So when you look at the beret insignia and my dad's thing over there, you see the H7, the King's monogram is in there. So this is graffiti from 1944, 1945, and kept it. For some strange reason, nobody really did anything to it. So I took this picture here last year. So there's the H7, that's my dad's, and this is the D13. So in my own berets and stuff like that, I have the King's insignia and a laurel leaf and the crown. That's just the way it was. Okay, a little bit then finishing up what I've done is being a reserve officer. I have been with Norwegian Embassy in Washington, D.C. last 20 years, supervising foot march badges for American military units. So here's a picture from a year ago where I arranged it at, this is in Bowling Green, Ohio. And another thing, there's the same Bowling Green, Ohio. We had arrangements and stuff like that. And the guys were pretty happy about getting that. And our last arrangements that we had was here at USI last Saturday. So that's one of my hobbies, being a retired Norwegian reserve officer. I have been doing this foot march thing for the last over 20 years, and it's been fun. So that's what I had planned to talk about, and then I'll be glad to entertain any kind of questions. Yes.
Did the Norwegian resistance have on the war?
Oh, heck of a lot. Because they were doing sabotage. Really, that was the main thing they were doing. And any kind of sabotage you get, for instance, take something like ball bearings. If you blew up a Norwegian ball bearing factory, then the ripple effect will be, how is Germany war machine going to get ball bearings? So it really messed up the transportation lines for Norway, for Germany. And another thing, if you wanted to put that in perspective, the nuclear business. The Norwegian blew up the heavy water factory in Norway and sort of put the German nuclear program back quite a bit. So I would say needlepoint, yes, but serious needlepoint, and especially the last year of the war, it impacted Germany quite a bit. Just more civil disobedience and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Nils, as you know, I've been to a number of cities and towns on the west coast of Norway,
Yeah.
and almost every one of them had a World War II museum.
Yes.
Is that common over the rest of Norway as well?
Pretty much, I would say. It may not be a big museum, but yes, there will be some commemorative from World War II, yes.
Nils, the books the Germans were taking, was there any theme to the books that they did not return?
No, none whatsoever. It was just family type sets of books, no pattern.
Are there any more questions for Nils? Jack.
So you had a bakery
Yeah,
and your customers were Germans?
the customer?
Yes.
No, the bakery was essentially provide bread to people in Oslo. There were several family bakeries in Oslo in those years.
Did you have any kind of relationships with the Germans, any kind of buy and sell or anything like that?
Indirectly, yes, because there were certain stores in the neighborhood that mom said especially, we don't patronize those stores because the owners were Nazis. So we had that, so there were certain stores we never ever frequented. But basically quiet, showing disapproval of that. But the bakery business was simply to provide bread with rationing and stuff like that to the people of Oslo.
Steve Grant, when the war ended,
Yeah.
what happened to collaborators?
They were put in jail and rounded up, and Dad, being a lawyer, got involved with that for several years afterwards. So some of the really bad guys, like Quisling and stuff, were executed, and a lot of the others would be in jail time. And also, still there's a stigma attached to you were collaborating during World War II. So during my high school years and stuff like that, not too far from it, it was still alive. Today, it's probably, age-wise, it's pretty much gone. But yes, it made an impact. And the fact that, being a, quote, a good Norwegian was something that was valued and still was and still is.
Nils, thank you. We appreciate hearing the. So please remember, in 2 weeks, it's the sanctuary on the hill, and please call in your reservations. Hope to see you in 2 weeks.
And there's the last picture of me